FM, Nairobi.
It is 6 minutes after 7 o'clock. Good morning. We'll start off and say welcome to our audience on KTN. Good to have you here as we get into things today. And also our live streams up on Facebook, on X, and on YouTube. Our guests, rather our hosts this hour, Ndu, Mark and Dennis, and we start a conversation this morning right around what happens with business. There was a question. So what happens with Rigathi Gachagua? Today's the day, Mark. You're saying somebody was asking when will the horse speak? Rigathi Gachagua is launching a new party. He's telling you the direction you're taking. He's telling you where the mountain is moving. Such things. Yeah. So it's today. Actually, we'll hear what this wonderful thing is that Rigathi Gachagua will offer. But just so you know, that was a question that came from somebody earlier. When is that happening? The horse will speak today. Tawa. Yes. All right. So we're getting into a conversation this morning around fiscal and economic reforms and the proposed tax regime review. And it's, stuff that needs to be on our fingertips when we protest, when we say yes. Are we doing that from a base of information and knowledge? So let's do that this hour. And we're going to do it with a gentleman who's already in the hot seat. The president is here. Of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Eric Ruto. Good morning.
Thank you very much. I really take the post very well because when you say the president, I'm sure
here we are, and we're talking about fiscal and economic reforms. We're looking at a tax regime review. We're looking at all of these in its entirety. But let's start from this point where we say, from a business point of view, from a private sector point of view, upon which a lot of this tax responsibility lies, what is an overview from that perspective as to this proposed tax regime that usually will represent itself in the finance bill?
Okay. I would like to handle these issues from the private sector, and as Kenya National Chambers of Commerce and Industry, we usually do KNCCI Business Barometer, which is an economic survey that we usually do it quarterly, which is a forward-looking quarterly, and we do interview our members, and they give us the reality on the ground. But before I answer that question directly,
Yes.
is that I would like to take you down the history lane on our fiscal and economic policy as a country. As we celebrate approximately maybe 62, 63 years today since independence, these matters have been discussed by our forefathers. We are discussing them currently. And last year, the event that happened on the finance bill was actually not an instantaneous event. I think it was an accumulation of factors that I think started way, way, way far from 1960s. And in this, we have had, as a country, 3 regimes. The first regime, and I know this paper is very famous, we call it the sessional paper number 10 of 1965. So what was that paper talking about? It talked about protectionism and using the local factories and having local businesses satisfying the local market. Then along the way, somewhere 25 years in the 90s, we had the structural adjustment programs, and the world was talking about globalization. And after now, Kenya went to another regime whereby they had to give tax and budgeting incentives to be able to make companies be able to export, because at that time, Kenya realized it could not exist. And then now we are in the regime of Vision 2030, which I think is extremely famous with everyone, and we are midterm 4 in terms of implementation of that fiscal policy. So therefore, as we fast forward, come to what is happening currently. If you look at the macroeconomics, look, for instance, at the current account balance and even the trading balance that we have. Kenya exports approximately goods worth 1 trillion. We import 2.7 trillion. There is a difference of around 1.7 trillion. What does that mean? It means definitely we are exporting jobs.
Yes.
And when we export jobs, it means the economy cannot be able to respond in terms of taxation. So these regimes that have, 3 regimes that we have had, would have required Kenya to be an extremely competitive environment. And as I come to now the finance bill of 2025, 2026, which if you look at the GDP, I think the deficit currently is at 4.5, down from 5.7 last year, which means, of course, government is tightening its fiscal expenditure. There's a lot of savings that is there. If you compare the one for last year and this year, in terms of GDP ratio, that is 4.5%, there is a little bit of reduction of deficit of 200 billion. So that reduces the pressure in terms of taxation. But fast forward, who are these businesses and people paying taxes?
Yes.
I think our economies are V-shaped, and I would like to give you an example of a ship in the ocean. That if you visit KRA books, you'll find approximately 1,900 businesses who you would indirectly or directly would pay 70% of the taxes. So this V-shape, 1,900 out of a possible 7.6 million businesses.
I was going to say that there's 2,000 businesses in Nairobi alone.
Yes.
On one
So,
one street.
Yeah. So, in where I come from, there's a lot of malnutrition in terms of how our businesses are structured. We have so large businesses and huge 99.9% of very small businesses. So therefore, because of tax administration, the government definitely will always go for the formalized businesses. And year in, year out, there's a lot of pressure to be able to tax these few businesses, and maybe now indirectly introduction of indirect taxes such as VAT, such as maybe digital tax. I know that is what brought a lot of issues, finance tax that brought a lot of issues last year. But looking at this budget, and globally, when I mentioned about the deficit, it's come to 4.5 in relation to GDP, which is around 650 billion. And we've dropped it from, I think, 2023, it was around 6.3 billion, 6.3%, came to 5.7%, now comes to 4.5%. What does that mean? It reduces the pressure of government to be able to tax its citizens and the businesses. Of course, we would like to have a very predictable and a constant tax regime. And I think this is what we have lacked as a country. And I would say if you compare ourselves with our neighbors, I would say the East African Economic Bloc, we've done some research and we found that Tanzania has had a relatively stable tax regime for the last 7 years. And if you looked at the DFIs that is going into East African countries, you will find that Kenya is not one of the leading countries. Uganda has beaten us. Tanzania is growing at a very fast rate. Ethiopia is almost 2 times. Somalia here, which is a state that has had a lot of challenges, is attracting half of what we are attracting as a Kenya.
Yeah.
Yet we prime ourselves as the largest economy, actually 40% of the GDP of the region, which means definitely what we would actually want is outside the quantum of the tax rate that we have, we seriously need a stable tax regime, at minimum, a 5-year tax regime that is predictable for us to be able to invest. Thank you.
So then, Dr. Ruto, because it is clear that the economists will tell us that in order to have a state whereby these numbers that you give us of 2.7 trillion and 1 trillion are inverted, so that you can see yourself exporting at the 2.7 trillion and importing at just the 1 trillion. The only way to do that is if you're operating in a surplus. The only way to operate in a surplus as a nation is to have your industries and manufacturing sectors then running at an optimum. In order to have those things done, it means that certain things that you must do, like you say, the private sector needs to be robust. But then that also means that the environment needs to be conducive in order for these businesses to run. Now, what needs to happen when you talk about a tax regime that then needs to be favorable for business? What does that look like?
You've talked very well about having for us to have a surplus. And we have to be competitive as an economy. And during our business survey, we have 3 things that usually appear in terms of the challenges that businesses face. One of it is the cost of credit, because if you're a manufacturer and you're accessing credit at between maybe 13 to 18%, and we know of late it's been averaging around 18-19%. And a manufacturer, maybe in the manufacturing countries, talk about where our leading trading partner is China. We talk about India. You talk about Turkey. They would access credit at between 4 and 8%. Of course, there's the issue of power, but I think Kenya, we can be able to offset that one in terms of cost of power, because our cost of labor is relatively lower as a country, which means we can become competitive. So what I would say is that why has government been increasing taxes over a long period of time? I think as a country, we have not taken the advantage of the long-term investments in the infrastructure sector. So the country has borrowed. I think currently our debt stands at around 11 trillion. That's around, is it around 80% of our GDP, which means it's putting government under a lot of pressure. So therefore, in terms of taxes, of course, you have to pay your debts. Government has to come to our businesses. Much more taxes, much more levies. And maybe I will give you an example of when I was coming here, one of my members sent to me, if you are to set up a small factory, I hope I can find this very fast. I would give you, if you are setting up a small factory, I have the statistics here, just a minute. Just a second as I check. I would want to give you what what is the cost of taxes and regulation in terms of the industry.
Okay. And a small company in this case being, between under 100 people, kind of thing, measured by the number of the workforce that you have?
I would say maybe a company that we want to set up maybe directly to employ around maybe 30 to 50 people.
Okay.
Yes. And here, before you establish, we have 20 levies that you have to pay. Can I list them?
Before you establish?
Yes, before.
Okay.
Before. That is the cost of capital in terms of regulatory requirement.
Okay, go.
And this is a company that was doing food processing in Kajiado County. One, Kenya Bureau for Halal certification, you have to pay 34,000. That's a license that is required for 12 months. Second is certificate of registration for workplace. That is DOSH, Directorate of Occupational Safety Health. That's 5,000. Permit to use a standard mark, that is KEBS, 58,000. Food hygiene license, of course, you will be able to, what will be KEBS and food hygiene will be doing, 50,000. County government of Kajiado Unified Business Permit. This is what we've really been lobbying. Actually, now we want a unified business permit for the whole country, not every county. That is 13,000. Public health inspection, that is a county government sale. Food handling, medical examination, that is another 1,000. Weights and measures, county government of Kajiado distribution of permit, first aid and fire training, plant examiner, refrigerator, license, first aid, audit, occupational health and health audit, barcode license, vehicle inspection, KEPRO membership, that is something to do with plastics, KEPRO monthly payment, NEMA permit, that comes to 337,712. So
no matter how small your factory is.
20 licenses. So tell me, usually the process of going into business or even manufacturing,
before you do anything,
is either you are employed, you've
Yeah.
done your savings, or you've been distributing. So before you even set up a factory, you are paying 337,000 in terms of permits and levies. So this is not competitive as a country. And that is why the companies who've been there for a long time, the 1,900, are the only ones. We cannot add into the pipeline. So we have to do away with extremely punitive barrier to entry as a country. And the big companies will not innovate. And I'll give you an example. I was talking to my members yesterday in terms of export. The first export that we had a country was tea. And we started in 1937. And you'll count 1 to 10, and you'll not count beyond 10 the diversity of the products that we are going to have. So what does it mean? It means even though we are extremely innovative, we are highly skilled, the barrier to entry in terms of business has to be reduced. And that is why we recently engaged the national government as the Kenya National Chambers of Commerce and Industry. All our delegates came to Nairobi, and we have actually proposed to the national government that for us to be able to widen the tax base, we must reduce the barrier to entry. We are proposing a phased-out approach in terms of payments of taxes, like a tax holiday for startups up to 2 years, and then a graduated up to 5 years that after 5 years now on the 6th year, when they can now stand and run, then government can come, because that would really enhance formalization. It will bring more businesses into the tax bracket. It will enhance our competitiveness, and it will even diversify our products to be able to, first of all, satisfy the local market. In fact, for me, I would say the first approach is we have a market of 1.7 trillion. If we remove oil, which you don't have, motor vehicle, which requires heavy investment and technology, we still have around 1.2 trillion to play with as a local company. So what I would say is that I think these are things that we need to sit down. We have to talk about the figures and the statistics, like the 20 licenses for a company to be able to manufacture in Kajiado. So I would say how many of companies would be able to afford
that?
337. And these are startups. This is someone most likely who's lost a job and had savings, maybe 500,000, $1 million, and they want to start a business. So I would say, in addition to the stable tax regime, our rate, and I would say it's not to blame this government, because they have a salary of 1 trillion. They have to pay the civil servants. Teachers, civil servants, you see they go to streets. Doctors, they go to streets. So what did you do? You're in government. So they have hard commitments. There's another 1 trillion that you have to pay per year. So government says that for every 10 shillings they collect, they have to pay 6.3 shillings in terms of debt. Yes. So I think these are things that we have to discuss as a country. But I know the pain and I know the outrow that Kenyans have. The other thing is government must behave in a situation whereby to the citizens, they must demonstrate, they must reduce laggas, they must reduce over expenditure. They must also, in terms of how they behave. When I see politicians going around the country with helicopters, that one it should be a country that is having a surplus. I would say if that behavior comes down, because also it's perception, and economy also is perception.
Absolutely.
So what I would say is that they must listen to this person who is earning less than the minimum salary of 13,000, maybe 300 shillings every day. Yeah. If you go to a farm and or you are going to wages, these guys. So they must be very sensitive to those guys. So from where I sit, I think there has to be reduction of the kind of behavior of laggas from government officers, and even I know parliament is one arm. They should also reduce. And also to the electorate, reduce the appetite of involving the politicians in activities that they are not constitutionally are not supposed to do. And finally, another thing that we really need to see as a country in terms of how we spend our taxes is that what is the economic value in lighting a bulb in a semi-permanent house in this country? It's extremely expensive. We know as a country, and we are competing with the whole world, is 70% are in the rural areas. Yes, we have to take roads, we have to take water, but I think we have to sit down and see, do we need to invest first in the industry so that these young people from the rural areas can come to the county or semi-urban areas to come and work so that we can be able to take services to them? Or do we as a country continue taking a tarmac road to each and every door in this country? And that is a pressure. For a politician, they want to survive the following day. They have to be voted. You've seen Mwananchi. When you say I brought electricity, what do they say? They will shout, hallelujah.
Indeed.
But after that light is on and off, they will want something to feed on. So we must also, and we are lobbying as a private sector, that the taxes that we're having, especially for the micro and small medium enterprises, we should invest part of it into the industry. So there has to be modernization of Kenya Development Industrial Corporation. We have Agricultural Finance Corporation. We have countries where they have agricultural banks. So the budgets that we're having, it should be focused there. So there should be reduced pressure on infrastructure development, and we have to purposefully invest in the industry. Otherwise, if we don't do that as a country, successive governments will come, will still have the challenges. We have seen what other economies have done. After you have done with your infrastructure development, you cannot complete it in a day or in a season. But what we've seen maybe for the last around 20 years, since Vision 2030 came, is that we have had huge infrastructure development. The railways have been developed, dams have been built, roads have been built. It is time that we have now to pause and say the billions of money that is going into rail development, road development, should now be focused into the industry, into production. I'm happy with this government. They've done fertilizer subsidy.
Okay.
That is our largest exports, is agricultural exports. It's reduced the cost of production.
Yeah.
The exports we are becoming more competitive. So that is something that we have to do. We also have to subsidize the industry. So this, in terms of production, not in terms of consumption. So these are some of the things that we dig down into our economy, and I would like to urge the business people, the members that I represent over 60,000 companies who are members directly and over 2 million through associations, that these are things that we are looking at and lobbying. We shall be in Parliament, and we'll have prepared a very fantastic paper looking at the history in terms of budgeting process for the last 6 years, And we are proposing to Parliament a tax regime, one that is predictable, and that is going to be focused on increasing the tax base. Thank you.
You know, there are a couple of points as you were speaking. I was just noting down a couple of things, and maybe I'll start with a conversation I had with a businessman in Tanzania last year. So I was having breakfast, and across the table, I met this director of a security firm that was trying to establish itself in Kenya. So he brought in investors from out of the country. This is a Kenyan I'm speaking to. So we got to talk about what he was doing in Tanzania. I was there for other businesses myself. So he told me, I'm actually relocating our business from Kenya to Tanzania. And I asked him why. And he said, to quote him, Kenya is a very hostile country. And we have a very hostile business culture. So the investors who are not Kenyans opted to move the business to Tanzania. And I asked him why. And he gave me a very interesting perspective around how we are operating in the country. And he said it's systemic. It's not today's government issue. And it's also how we've managed, because you spoke about a stable tax regime. We seem, and it's a very, very sad situation, we seem to be having a situation in Kenya, and it's not unique to Kenya only, a lot of countries in the continent, where when one government, after an election, one government is out, another government comes in. So this new government comes in to implement their manifesto. Now, a lot of times when you interrogate the manifestos of any political outfit that wants to take over power, it's so detached from the economic realities of the country. That's where the rain starts beating us. So before we even come to discussing a budget, we just try to take a few steps back, and you realize that whatever currently we are trying to push into the finance bill and all these conversations around tax is based off what was being peddled before the government took over power. And so what we tend to have, we don't have a structured way of managing tax in this country, in the sense that whichever government comes in, there are areas of priority that you don't compromise on. This week, 3 big stories, and they're all touching on money. So we first had the intelligence chief saying that the security agencies need more funding. And there is a huge cry on what are we being allocated within this proposed budget. Then you have yesterday, there's education. There's a conversation around the defunding of the school feeding program and so many other things that are going on. So within the same today is when? Wednesday.
Yes.
Today is Wednesday. Still, between Monday and today, the doctors, the nurses are also speaking. You realize that we have not prioritized the most important sectors, and it's because of the politicization of these budgets that are hurting businesses. You spoke of infrastructure. Where we are today, according to the conversation I had with that businessman, is with the conversations we're having today, we were supposed to have them in the 1990s. Today, we shouldn't even be talking so much about infrastructure in that sense. We should be talking about smart infrastructure to give comparison to countries like Singapore and other countries, because you have a very big base of young people who may not afford to get loans, who may not afford to start up an industry, employ 10 people, can't even afford to get loans, but they have technology. So how do we then empower these young people to build businesses around smart technologies so that we expand the economy? Because where we are stuck to strategies that should have worked in the 90s, and we're trying to make them work today because it is just, it feels almost like it was yesterday when we were talking about Vision 2030. We are in 2026.
4 years
and I began
to go.
to realize,
Yeah.
wait a minute, this thing looked like, when you talk about vision, first of all, you think this is something that is 50 years to come, it's too far, but it's 2026. And if you look at the 2030 vision, a number of the things that have been listed in the 2030 vision, and we are in 2026, 4 years to 2030, it's unfortunate where we are. You talked about those levies. And I'll give an example. I spoke to a young man who wanted to start a mineral water business, selling water. The young man, who is just a college graduate, had 50,000 that he could get as a loan. He wants to start the business of selling water. If to go the legal way to get all these levies and permits, the figures were so astronomical that the fellow has to take shortcuts.
Yeah.
So what is also hurting the economy as a result of this very hostile environment is you have businesses that will want to take shortcuts, and therefore you don't get money coming back in form of tax that can help the country develop.
So what would be, even as we go to a break, we're going to go to a break in just a bit, but then in terms of that, what would be the strategy to then look through to some of these things?
Dennis, this one for the business environment, you get it spot on 100%. And this is something that I, as Dr. Ruto is the president of Kenya National Chambers of Commerce and Industry.
Yeah.
When you talk about 7.4 million businesses, I experience this kind of hostility. The issues of bureaucratic processes that we have as a country to be licensed, when KRA comes to your door, in most of the times, people will close shops. I think there's a time that government, 2 years ago, they hired, 10,000 young people as tax enforcement agents, which was the wrong direction of how I see it. So actually, local investors, and even worse, international investors, and what you're talking about, the Tanzanian kind of experience, is that if you set up a business, it is like a criminal venture that you have. And I would like to give you one example. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, there is a factory that was somewhere in Thika. It was closed. And I think government said this factory was evading tax in terms of the KRA stamps. And it was estimated it was 2.8 billion per month.
That they should have been paying in taxes?
That they should have been paying in taxes. For me, if I'm this person who is at the top there, I will take the whole of KRA. I looked at their payroll.
Yeah.
They don't spend 2.8 billion every month.
Yeah.
They close this factory for almost 3 years. And you see, what message are you giving the business community? That it is criminal for you to do business in this country.
Okay.
And I'm talking about the issue of bureaucracy and the business environment.
Yeah.
And it is extremely serious. It is extremely serious. Just allow me to finish.
Yeah, just quick.
It is extremely serious, that issue of criminalization. In fact, in the finance bill of 2025, they are suggesting that they can come to our records without getting a high court order.
Yes.
You getting?
Yeah.
So what will happen? People run away.
Okay.
And in terms of tax administration, it's going to be more difficult.
Let's take a break on this point. I want us to come
yes.
back and look
Yes.
at this criminalization,
Yes.
because that's essentially, if we're saying that businesses are the bedrock of an economy,
Yes.
and you're essentially making sure that they can't do business, then what are you saying? So we're going to look at that in relation to some of the laws that may come in the very near future. The president of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce, Dr. Eric Ruto, is here with us this morning having this conversation. We'll be back right after this break.
Not as some of those things that stifle business being made easier.
Okay, and maybe I would first to say that the direction that this Finance Bill 2025 is going, I would say, in terms of the future, if we are going to run a balanced budget, it means it reduces pressure of government to increase taxes. So the progressive reduction in terms of the budget deficit goes a long way in terms of having a stable tax environment. Secondly, in terms of our investments, we can be able to net off the cost of capital in terms of tools and equipment. So I think that is something that is extremely positive.
Yeah.
And we have to applaud this budget for 2025.
Yeah.
So that one is a very positive direction because we want to stimulate the economy. We want to have more industries. We want our contribution in terms of GDP. We've stuck at almost 7.2 for the last almost 13 years right now in terms of contribution of GDP from the manufacturing sector. So that one, I would say we welcome it, and it is being applied to all businesses. Initially, it was in the special economic zones or in EPZs, but they can immediately deduct that capital from the taxes that they were supposed to pay. So that is good. Scrapping of 1.5 digital tax, I think that is something that is, we know currently as a country, 54% of our GDP is in the service sector, and ICT and digital technology is heavy. So scrapping 1.5 digital service tax is a huge step towards this tax that we are having currently. In terms of tax relief on employees, I think that one is that to be applied directly by the employers. That one is a very good step forward, because if you look at our on the pay slips, I think there are three factors that really affected the pay slips of our employees, and they've really been crying that what they take home finally is low. There's a housing levy. There was the health, that is a SHA, Social Health Authority, which went up. And I think in terms of savings, also National Social NSSF also went up. So I would say these tax issues on terms of reliefs for the employees is a good direction in terms of this 2025 finance bill. In addition to that, I think, of course, there are areas that we really need to improve on. And we shall definitely be heading to Parliament to be able to address this. And also, we're still talking also with the Treasury, although I know Constitution our target in terms of increasing the contribution of manufacturing into GDP. So those are some of the issues that, and of course, the issue of criminalization of tax, whereby KRA can access our records, our financial records directly. You know, this one will really have serious issues, especially because they are trade secrets that we have to have as a company, intellectual property. So these are some of the things that definitely we shall be opposing when this bill comes to Parliament, and I think we shall be giving these proposals amongst others that we are going to do. Thank you.
We often sit and wait for government because we know the number crunchers get into business from about August when we're talking about the budget. But businesses and the country at large usually sits and waits for the results of this process and says, okay, how about now that you've said this is what is going to happen in terms of a new regime, then we will be either accepting of it or not. We'll go through public participation. But at the end of the day, what has been suggested is what is then consumed and then what is abided by. And I've just been thinking that isn't it about time that there would be a rigorous, consistent insistence on some of these things that we see. When we make comparisons with other nations about their manufacturing and their industrial activity, the fact of the matter is that what drives these economies is the private sector. It is not government. What government has done in many of these cases is made the conducive environment then available, like what you talk about with the taxes that we talk about that are so punitive, that they have created an environment within which private sector then can thrive. Because it is not the government that is making it has a jam factory. It is a family that has set up this jam factory and is making the produce available to the local economy. It is somebody who is making matchsticks. It is somebody who is making plastic containers. It is somebody who is packaging food. It's somebody who is doing dry goods. It is individuals and their companies within a conducive environment that are then making it possible for the government to collect taxes across a wider base. So when we talk about will we ever get there, perhaps are we focusing enough on insistence that this environment is actually conducive to achieve this very thing that you talk about, Dr. Ruto?
Okay, in terms of policy information and advocacy, I would like to look at the leading economies in terms of manufacturing, or even the number one economies. We have the American economy, which is the largest economy in the world at 27 trillion, followed by China at around 17 trillion. In Europe, the largest economy is Germany.
Yeah.
And I think if you come to, there's India in the Asia side, outside China, there's India and Turkey. If you look at those countries, the bodies that would be able to inform government are institutional and are structured. In America, the American Chamber is the most powerful organization outside the government. If you go to Germany, the strongest chamber is the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Yes.
If you go to Turkey, the Turkish Chamber of Commerce and Industry is the strongest. If you go to China, it's actually the second government. If you come to India, it's very strong. So it means there is a formal engagement with government in terms of policies. What we are suggesting ourselves, if you come to Kenya, you have over 1,000 business associations. These 1,000 business associations will present their issues to government. But government is us, me and you. So how would you expect government to be able to listen to 1,000 representatives in terms of lobby? If, for instance, you come to employees, they have KOTU. We have Law Society of Kenya. I would be extremely surprised why the employer doesn't have a body that is constitutional, that is statutory, so that these things that we are all of us, we are at fault, because we are supposed, actually, Treasury usually asks for policies. They ask for us to be able to contribute to it. But because you do not have a single strong body to lobby, just like the workers have, they have KOTU, they have the Civil Servants Union, we need a very strong body. And that strong body should be the Chambers of Commerce and Industry. It's been done. The top 6 leading economies have strongest business membership organization as the strongest union in those countries. So what I would say, you were saying, yes, these are things that government should be getting. Secondly, I want to come into the issue of issues of taxes. Another area that we have that is very critical is tax administration. From our research and also from research of government is that we lose approximately 250 billion to undervaluation of goods that come from outside the country. So therefore, you walk to downtown here and you'll pay their rightful due taxes so that our factories can become competitive. Of course, there is the issue of counterfeits. And there was a time that government had a rapid initiative. It was a concerted effort of the private sector, government, security agencies. And unfortunately, sometimes small businesses were targeted because of the cost of compliance. So we wiped out the small businesses that are coming up. And that is why we are suggesting this issue of some tax benefit to the startups. Yeah. For instance, if you are supposed to be compliant to get a standardization mark, can we have a program whereby we can say we reduce for startups? Because they are not compliant because the cost is prohibitive. But anyway, they have to do business. They've got to survive. So that is one thing. Another thing, I think you commented on the issue of the security that their budget is being reduced. From where I sit, it's a vicious circle. This country, every year, we hire military officers, prison, police, every year, 5,000, 10,000. What if we say today the largest economy is agriculture? Why don't we hire agriculture champions? We stop hiring police officers because the issue of insecurity is every time the police are requesting is about crime. Right. From where I sit, the reason why these young people almost die to join the police, because they are sure that it is a permanent, unpensionable job. Why don't we divert that budget, and these are the discussions we're going to have to Parliament, and say every year, hire agricultural officers, 5,000, and give them permanent and pensionable to advise me as Dr. Ruto to grow potatoes so that we don't import potatoes for our KFC. Because KFC are saying we want certain quality.
Yes. Yeah.
The farmers are ready to plant. They are ready to go to the farms. But they do not have the right advice. Secondly, instead of hiring prison officers, 5,000, you're getting? So that they can go take care of someone who has stolen a chicken. And by the way, there is a recent, as I was coming here in the morning, my neighbor told me there is a village called Munyaka. And there's a gang which has come up. And it's not been heard for the last 10, 12 years.
Yes.
That kind of insecurity that is happening is we are treating the symptoms instead of the disease. Let's hire another 5,000 to come to the industry and subsidize the industry. So I would say, I think I need to have a discussion. The security, was it the IG or was the cabinet secretary?
It was the NIS boss. Yeah.
NIS boss, eh? Yeah. Yes, he has the intelligence. I think we need to have a conversation.
Just a quick question. And we're about to wrap up. The question I have for you is pretty simple. As you are going through the things that are barriers, halal certification, KEBS and things like that, I kept thinking at the back of my mind that these are institutions that we put in place to ensure that the quality of the products that we receive are of a higher quality and meet the requirements of the country. So I'm separating because I liked what you said about the taxes. It was very balanced. You said what was good about the taxes and what was missing. But I'm looking at these institutions such as KEBS, the Halal Institution, NEMA, etc. How would that be managed?
I would say definitely we need our products to be of standard and they need to be safe. What I think is that these institutions are being told by Exchequer to raise their own funds so that they can operate. So therefore, I would give you one analogy. If you have a chicken that is laying eggs, do you go wait for that one egg to come out, you take it away, you go and eat? Or let that chicken lay egg, roost on it, and then now you have, you hatch them egg. And you have them. So what is happening in terms of these regulated organizations is that they are being told to internally raise funds. And therefore, the regulatory fees they have to raise so that they can meet their recurrent expenditure, the payment of salaries, operations and maintenance, office spaces. So what I would say is that that is where we are. But if we allowed these businesses to grow, they will be able to pay the universal tax, and therefore the Exchequer will be able to fund those institutions. So what I would say is that we are putting the cart before the horse.
And we should be looking in the other direction.
And we should be looking in the other direction.
Absolutely.
So that is where I would urge ourselves. Secondly, we are living in a democracy. I would say there is too much law, there is too much government. And if you look at the history, at the economic development of the world, and you compare the two philosophies, I would say we have too much government. The reason why we have a lot of pressure on our current expenditure is too much government. We have to have a conversation on that. We have to reduce
and start cutting the red tape.
The government.
Absolutely.
Red tape will disappear, but too much government.
Too much government. It's good that we do have these conversations and keep them front and center. Thank you very much for being here with us this morning. It's stuff to think about and for us to spur on further conversations into action. Dr. Eric Ruto is the president of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and looking at some issues around economic reforms and the proposed tax regime. These conversations continue. Thank you so much for being here. Good morning. It's 8 a.m.
Thank you very much for hosting for hosting us. And